And I would also like to introduce and welcome up our FOLA and LSO Helping Underserved Community panel. I'm delighted to introduce Cheryl Saran, who's from my neck of the woods in Northwestern Ontario. She is a partner with Hook-Seller Lundin. She is a former president of Cadelpa and changed our name to FOLA. It's so much easier to say. And she is a current bencher as well as the co-chair of the Access to Justice Committee. We have Cara O'Hagan, who is the Executive Director of Policy, Equity, External Relations at the Law Society, and Patty Latimer, who is our Strategic Policy Counsel from the same organization. And I am delighted to welcome them to provide us an update with respect to the motion that FOLA brought forward at the annual general meeting last year, which seems such a short time ago as well as such a long time ago. So join me in welcoming them to provide us an update today.
No, I'm okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is amazing to be back at a Federation of Ontario Law Associations meeting, and I'm so pleased to be able to speak to you all today and hopefully provide you an update that'll demonstrate the steps we've taken since the new bench was elected last spring to address the FOLA motion. So as indicated by Karen, I've got with me Cara O'Hagan today. She's Executive Director, Policy, Equity, and External Relations at the Law Society, and then Patty Latimer, who is the Strategic Policy Counsel. So we are here today to talk about the motion that was brought by FOLA at the annual general meeting last spring. By way of background, it's important to note, just as far as timing, the motion was brought right after the conclusion of the bencher election and was supported heavily by a number of the benchers who had just been elected as far as who now sit in convocation. So it started out strong in that sense. So a summary of the motion, I think, should be up on your screen. So it really arises from the fact that many communities across the province are experiencing a shortage of lawyers, and that's, of course, more particularly felt in some of the rural and northern communities. The communities are struggling to attract and retain junior lawyers and licensing candidates to either start or join existing practices. This has, of course, been exacerbated by the graying of the bar, which can leave populations underserved as lawyers are retiring or leaving practice, and then further exacerbated as some of the results arising from COVID. And the impacts of the change in what lawyers were doing, and in my view, and I think others share this, an exodus of private practitioners for a variety of reasons from their practices, their private practices, to government or other salaried positions for the stability at that time. So in addition to some communities experiencing a shortage of private lawyers generally, there also is a shortage of lawyers in key areas of practice. So this is particularly felt where Legal Aid Ontario offers certificates. And ultimately, despite the move towards more digital and hybrid type work since COVID, FOLA has sort of taken the position that access to justice continues to require locally based lawyers, even though there is this ability to be remote, but locally based lawyers who can provide in-person services if necessary, and particularly those to assist persons from low-income, vulnerable and marginalized communities. And this is a view I personally share and is fundamental to the local communities we serve as practitioners. So FOLA's motion, which was subject to a friendly amendment to include a reference to paralegals as licensees, was carried. So in general, the motion called that the Law Society development and implement financial and non-financial strategies and incentives for the purpose of encouraging lawyers and paralegal licensee candidates and recently called lawyers or recently licensed paralegals to join practices in underserved communities, and that the strategies and incentives be developed may include any or all of preferential licensing program fees or rebates, preferred rates for annual fees, and small firm and sole practitioner succession planning supports. So in accordance with Law Society's bylaws, Section 42 sub 2, if anyone's paying attention, The Treasurer referred the motion directly to the Access to Justice Committee to consider and report back to convocation within 6 months, which is the requirement under that we had 6 months basically to do it. This is why I mentioned the timing. As indicated, the bencher election had just been completed, and as such, it took some time for the Treasurer to put together the committees and get them implemented. So the committee actually met for the first time in relation to this motion on October 18th of 2023. So what did we do? We called Doug and said, hey, Doug, what are you doing? We're going to need you to come and talk to us, break down and be a little bit more in depth and have a frank conversation with us about, what you're hearing from the presidents and the associations and what FOLA, just to have a more robust discussion about it. So Doug provided a letter to the committee in advance, and then we engaged in a dynamic discussion. I think I'll leave it to Doug to comment whether it was dynamic or not. I was engaged, thank you, and really flushed out some of the ideas, which quite honestly could get a little broad. Ultimately, the committee agreed that these are very important issues that need to be considered by convocation. However, before we can look to strategies and incentives, we had to first determine what does it mean for a community to be underserved. Doug was not part of this part of the discussion. This was also a dynamic discussion because underserved as a term was subject to a very long discussion within the committee, coming as we all do as a committee from very different perspectives, different areas of practice, different areas of geographically. There was a debate about what would qualify as underserved and how far that definition could go. So, for example, one of the discussion was it was fairly well known that Francophone Ontarians really struggle to find representation across the province. There just isn't a lot of Francophone lawyers, so that's a particular community, Francophones, that is underserved generally. But then there's also immigration. I learned a lot about immigration, that apparently it's very underserved in Southern Ontario. There isn't a lot of lawyers doing it. And so when we talked about it, there's individuals who aren't trained in that area, so it's another sort of broad definition of underserved. So ultimately what we decided was a consensus to say that although there are many different ways to look at underserved and underserved communities, what we really understood, FOLA's focus was to be about geography to start. And although we are going to look at certain practice areas, we agreed that this was the right focus to start as far as getting an investigation and considering regionally what we're looking at and then discussing the strategies that we can advance. So we did do a recommendation to convocation, which was approved November 30th of 2023. So in our report to convocation, the committee made the following recommendations, which were approved, and I'm pretty sure approved unanimously, again, showing that there is support and appreciation for what FOLA brought forward at the AGM and the seriousness of the considerations. So one, the committee is now tasked with overseeing research into what constitutes communities that are underserved in terms of legal services. Two, the committee will consult with FOLA and other stakeholders as needed in relation to the developing strategies in response to the motion. And then after further consideration of the motion, the committee will recommend strategies to address the motion and take it to convocation for decision. So where are we now? So we now have the approval of convocation. So the committee has commenced preliminary research into what constitute communities that are underserved in terms of the legal services, again, focusing primarily on geographic communities. And we've started with the data that's available to us, which is ours, the Law Society annual reports. We're looking at data by region and by county, areas of law and age of licensees. This information is still relatively new and is just coming in, which is why I'm not going to show you any stats on that. However, although we are still analyzing the data, FOLA is right. We took a snapshot, a very high-level snapshot of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And the concerns about retraction and decline in rural remote communities, no surprise probably to this group, are borne out by the numbers. And anyone who's dealt with the Law Society before knows that they really like having numbers to support initiatives. So great news, the numbers are there. Bad news, it means that our communities are consistently being underserved across the province. So there's multiple regions where the number of lawyers has decreased fairly significantly in the last 15 years in general, but most notably in the key practice areas of criminal law and family law. So there's definitely validity to the data, and that's a good starting point. We then reached out to some external sources, one of which is Legal Aid Ontario. We only actually received information last week about their roster of lawyers. We've decided to proceed to make a more formal request to Legal Aid Ontario for some additional information if it's available. We're a little unclear on the collection of statistics by Legal Aid, and we're hoping to clarify what other statistics may be available, because what they've given us is extremely high level, is difficult to cross-reference, and just hard to distill at this stage. So we're going to continue the data collection, but our other next step involves you. We appreciate, and certainly I appreciate, that you all as leaders of your individual associations get bombarded with emails, and you can't buy a coffee today without being asked to do a survey, so I'm sorry. However, on the ground information from each and every one of you about what is happening in your associations is going to be fundamental to determining where underserved areas are, because each area is so unique and so different. So what my area needs is definitely different from Cornwall or Morrisburg. And we all know that all those areas are underserved. So the follow-up that's going to come is you're going to let us know by way of this survey, which I'm not sure when we're exactly getting it out, but soon. That you would take the time to respond and give us, we need raw data. And it's clear the gaps are going to be different in different regions. And it's something we're really going to have to grapple with when we're talking about being asked to form a strategy to apply across the board. So, the more data we can have to sort of analyze that, the broader I think our ideas are going to be, and the more that they'll actually work towards helping the issue. So again, on the ground information, apologize. We know you get tons of requests. You already answer them as fairly frequently, but we hope that you'll take the time to do that, because we need that and it's critical. So I know some of you have probably already been in contact with my colleague standing at the back. Hi, Naya. Who's been individually speaking to some of you and doing some of her own research through the OBA and getting conversations with each of you and asking these questions directly. So we're also going to account for Naya's information as it comes in, which you're going to hear about, I think, a little bit more tomorrow. But we are looking from what the Access to Justice Committee is a little bit more solid numbers. So again, while time consuming, we ask that you complete those. We're also going to have questions about new licensees and licensing candidates, as we need to know more about why they're not choosing or staying in private practice generally, and particularly not in the rural and remote areas. So I think, again, we all know that the pressures faced by students coming out of law school, in particular in the skyrocketing cost of legal education, and those particular impacts. But we don't want to assume that that's the only reason. We want to be able to sort of flush out what else is there. And one of the interesting ideas that's come out of the committee is saying, wouldn't it be great if a student, this is just a random example, could go onto the Law Society website and see that in Cornwall they need criminal lawyers. There's a shortage right now. Like, if there's a way to, like, just in thinking through some of these strategies, right? So again, why that information becomes so important. Because maybe as much as there is this huge hurdle of the cost of legal education, if someone has an idea that they can go and start their practice and have an opportunity to build a business right at the hop, that might be one way that we can ultimately look at dealing with this. So we're also going to be looking for your feedback on changes that you've noted on the ground in your region since COVID. Again, with the hybrid work and virtual court appearances, one of the pieces of data that we're having trouble sort of piecing out is, you might be a lawyer, who now, because of remote, can take clients further and further out. So we're getting some crossover data. So anything we can hear from some of the regions and associations about what they're seeing for that might be helpful in sort of clarifying some of that. So that's where we're at as of right now. It's not an easy project. The ask is big, but we're here to say we're working on it. But more importantly, we need to work on it because it's the truth. It's borne out already, like I said, high level in the data we have. So, and now I'm going to ask Kara to speak a little bit about some of the things that we are already doing as far as initiatives. And go ahead, Kara.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. So I think Diana Miles highlighted a lot of the things that the Law Society is doing to support practitioners, particularly sole practitioners and practitioners in small firms. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of what she said, and I hope it's going to just serve as a reminder to all of you about some of the resources that we have at the Law Society and encourage you to use them, because really what we want to do is set you all up for success and ensure that you continue to succeed in a business way and ethically and in the service of your clients. I personally am getting kind of tired of my colleague Glenn Stewart talking about how busy he is in discipline. I hope he stops saying that at some point. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that are available to you. Diana talked about the Foundations of Sole Practice, which is a mandatory course for those who are going to be designating as a sole practitioner for the first time in 2025. That course is also available for anyone else who wants to take it. And again, it is really intended to set practitioners up for success. So it deals with some of the things, a lot of the things that you don't learn in law school. It's focused on giving guidance on a client service and communication, on financial and practice management, on the business of running a law practice, and about professional responsibility in practice. It's kind of like having an online mentor, and in fact, many of the modules are informed and narrated by sole practitioners, and they're going to be talking about their own experience. So it's going to be very immediate and useful information. It's broken down into modules that you can use at any time. And although it's described as a 30-hour course, that really depends on the user. So if you're the person who's been managing the trust accounts all the time, but you want to brush up on business development, you could whip through the trust account part of it and focus on the business development or vice versa. It's really designed to be very user-friendly. The other thing I want to remind you about is a tried and true resource, but it is one of our most popular ones, and that is the Practice Management Helpline. The PMH provides experts that you can reach by email or by phone. They're paralegals, they're lawyers who can advise you on all kinds of practice management and professional issues, including compliance with the rules of professional conduct. PMH covers not only consistent issues like conflicts and scope of practice for paralegals, for example, but also emerging issues like client identification and verification obligations under Bylaw 7.1. We also use PMH in the policy division to find out about trends and issues that practitioners are dealing with so that we can, if possible, address those. So really, I just encourage all of you to reach out to PMH whenever that's helpful to you. And then finally, we have CAN, the Coach and Advisor Network. Again, Diana talked about that, but I'd like to remind you that this, again, is a way of providing mentorship for practitioners who who need it in the moment, need short-term advice and guidance, and may not be able to get it through the traditional methods. We all know that COVID has disrupted a lot of our conventional relationships with each other, with mentors, with people who are more senior in the bar. So CAN can really step in and provide some assistance. Coaches support the implementation of best practices, and advisors actually can help you with a client file on substantive and procedural law issues. So again, please do reach out. Please use our resources. They're there for you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kara. So we're standing between you guys and break, so everyone has a question, I'm sure. Is there any questions or comments about the work of the Access to Justice Committee? If you don't have them now, I'm co-chair. My contact information is splashed all over the internet. By all means, call. You know, but again, having the contact from this group in particular, which is near and dear to my heart, is going to be vital to sort of moving forward in this and doing the best we can.